Hello again, and welcome to Forum for a Better Understanding. This is our 297th conversation with you, and we're so glad that you're joining us on such an important topic. The big issue I'd like to raise today is why in Ashland, New York, and Fresno is a play like The Merchant of Venice being produced? Now you might say, well, why not? And I say, we're going to look at an issue that maybe you have not been aware of, but is something we need to discuss. Is the play anti-Semitic? And if it is, how can we best understand it and find what Shakespeare is sharing with us in this tremendously powerful comedy? I say comedy because when you go to the drama shelf or the tragedy shelf, you will not find this play. It is actually one of his comedies. And on that note, I want you to know we have the director of this play, who is Heather Parish, who brought to our eyes here at the Woodward Shakespeare Festival a tremendously rich presentation of this play. To her side is Jaguar Bennett, who has been on this panel other times, but this time he comes having played the role of Shylock, who is that main character in this very challenging play. And across from me is our good friend, Rabbi Zirkind, who at other times has talked about Judaism in so many enlightened ways, and today will help us see his insights as a Jewish observer to the problems that are inherent in a play that deals with Jews in Christian Europe during the Middle Ages or during the Renaissance, or in fact during any time in Christian Europe. On that note, I'd like to ask our wonderful panel an opening question that I think might help of us all begin clearly. What is for each of you the main element or the basic fact that we'd like to present about the importance of The Merchant of Venice, and something that might be enlightening to people who are not even sure that they know what this play is about?
For me, as a director, the bottom line was simply our theme, which is no one gets off easy. There's nobody in this play who is doing things exactly right, and everyone's trying to figure out ways to justify what they're doing in their own minds. And they don't always come off really, really great when they're doing it. So the bottom line is to look at the play and say, which of those things am I prone to doing, and which things can I correct in my own life?
Jaguar, you are the main person here about this issue of what you could have done, did do, and shouldn't have done. Tell us about how this impacts you as Shylock.
Well, what really attracted me to playing Shylock is that he's such an outsider character. And to me, that is one of the core components of the play, is how we use religious and ethical conceptions to create outsiders and insiders. Shylock is the predominant Jewish character of the play. Most of the other major characters are Christian. They all look down on Shylock for no other reason than he is Jewish and they're Christian. And they seem to think that they have some kind of better moral status for their religious affiliation. That is not borne out in their actions, as Heather said. They mostly behave very poorly. So that's all this is for them, is sort of a tribal marker. Who's in, who's out. And for Shylock, I was trying to portray what is it like for a person to be on the outside of that.
Thank you for that opening thought. Now, Rabbi, as a reader of the play, as an observer, and as a Jew, what's one thing that you want people to remember about The Merchant of Venice? The first thing they need to know.
Number one, they need to know that he acted on his own, and he did not have any education, did not have his Jewish roots, and didn't have a good Jewish upbringing. We don't behave this way. Another thing that is a fundamental thing, we may elaborate later, is that not everything written in the Torah is to be taken literally. And the classic, which is very much directed to Shylock, is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth does not mean an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And you need the Talmud, the rabbinic interpretation, to tell us that it means money. And it's not physical. Let's explain. The quote is, if a person will go and knock out an eye or a tooth, you're supposed to pay You're supposed to take his eye or take his tooth. That's basically the quote. The Talmud comes and tells us there's a fundamental premise here. Based on the verse of Proverbs, chapter 3. The ways of the Torah are ways of sweetness, and its pathways are of peace. So with that premise, you look at that it cannot be. God is telling us to take people's eyes and the teeth out. So what is God telling us? God is looking for justice derived out of compassion. And he says we look at the productivity of the individual. And the quote the Talmud is, how much is a person being worth on the market that's sold as a slave with 2 hands versus 1 hand? Namely, how much productivity? We look at the action, what the person can accomplish in terms of work. There is no price on a human being. There is no price on any limb. The Torah wants us to look at the entire picture here. We don't want people walking around with broken arms or broken teeth. We want them to look normal and healthy human beings. And if there is a fight and the tragedy happens that a person loses a limb, there is a scheduled fee of payments. But it's not payments for the price of the hand. It's the price what the hand can do. That is a fundamental that has to be looked at in the context of Shylock and Antonio in the dealings.
Heather and Jaguar, could you help bring it back? What Rabbi just said that seemed very much rooted in the Torah and in the Talmud, how any part of that element does see itself played out in any of the characters, in any of the dynamics, in any of the workings of this play.
Well, it's one of the most interesting things about Shylock is that he behaves in the most un-Jewish way imaginable. He does not show mercy. He instead shows a great deal of hardness. He does not try to work out or resolve his conflict with Antonio. He's motivated by hatred. But the hatred comes on both sides. One of the first things that we establish about Shylock and Antonio's relationship is that they've known each other for years, and they've never gotten along well. And that furthermore, Antonio is quite anti-Semitic. One of the first lines between them, when Antonio is coming to borrow money from Shylock on behalf of his friends, and Shylock is amazed that Antonio is coming to him. And he says, many a time and often in Rialto you have rated me about my monies and my usances. You call me misbeliever, cutthroat dog, and spit upon my Jewish gabardine. And now you come to me and you say, Shylock, we would have monies. What should I say to you? Should I not say hath the dog money? Is it possible a cur can lend 3,000 ducats? And what Shylock is coming forth is that he's got a good reason for his attitude towards Antonio, but he does not stop. He can't relent. The hatred between them is too strong.
Heather, how did you, as the director, who chose a challenging, complex, very difficult dynamic to play, how was it that you decided you would be guided in creating this wonderful play that we have at Woodward Shakespeare Festival?
Well, we use actually something we call a technique we call the dramatic action statement, which is a statement that everybody uses to begin creating their characters. And for us, that statement was, how do we justify our small and large cruelties in the name of personal fulfillment? And so it wasn't necessarily about, that statement went for Shylock, that statement went for Portia, that statement went for Bassanio, everybody. And they all have moments of being cruel to each other on a small and large scale. So that's sort of the tie-in. We also set it in a modern setting, so we're not necessarily dealing with the history of the two religions together. It's simply one tribe against another tribe. But the Rabbi is correct in that everything that's written in what Shylock does in this play has no bearing or understanding of the Torah, of Jewish education, because Shakespeare didn't know any Jews. there were a few Jews in England that they were in secret. There was one who wasn't, and that was the doctor of Queen Elizabeth. And he did not end well either. So his idea, Shakespeare wrote this as an outsider, somebody who was completely outside of his audience's known circumstances, a Jew. He did the same thing with Othello, with the Moor. He's done the same thing with a number of other plays. And so he had no understanding of what made a Jewish character other than the stereotypes that had sunk into the English culture at that time. And so when we're trying to deal with a modern interpretation of that, all we can look at is the text and what the man does in the play itself and begin to grapple with that.
That's great. Rabbi, maybe you could help us right here with not something that's a stereotype, but rather reality, because it's documented in history. Could you walk us through a little bit of how Judaism survived in Christian Europe? Because that may be very enlightening to our viewers as to what it was like to have lived a Jewish existence when you were the outsider.
We survived by the graces of God. That's number one. There's a parable that is spoken, it's actually a verse, that the Jews are like a one sheep among 70 wolves. And we still survive. And what I will be honest and say is that Jews stuck together. Unfortunately, we were put in ghettos, not just in the Nazi Germany we were put in ghettos. We were put in ghettos. The first ghetto was in Italy, Venice, Italy was the first ghetto in history. And throughout the, throughout history, Jews were not had paid heavy taxes to parting expression support the anti-Semitic rulers, who never really cared for them other than to take taxes from them. And when they had problems, they would come to the Jews to straighten out their problems. But there are many like financial dealings, because the people they hired were dishonest. And they had there was no ethics by most of the people they hired, and a lot of people they realized that they couldn't. They owned the businesses, but they couldn't manage the businesses. So who they hired? Jews, because the Jews had integrity, the Jews had honesty, and the Jews knew how to figure out how to make something turn from nothing to profitable. And that was the stereotype, but they still put us in the ghetto, and they shunned us from what you call, quote unquote, living a normal life, whatever normal was in that time. Unfortunately, that's what kept, shall I say, Judaism alive. The historical, what you call the Enlightenment movement, which started in Germany and France, was really not to Judaism's betterment, it was to Judaism's worse. History will tell you, at least in the Hasidic history, that when Napoleon went after and was trying to conquer entire Europe, and Napoleon was promising equal liberty and justice for all, even though there was the story with the what was the guy they broke the sword, forget his name, the French officer who they I'm trying.
Dreyfus?
No. Dreyfus.
Yeah.
Dreyfus. So they, with all their quote unquote liberal ideas and open-minded ideas, they still were anti-Semitic whenever it came a chance. So the big debate, even among great you call Jewish leaders, was what's more important, the spirituality of the Jew or the physical fulfillment of the Jew? That was a debate, and I say a serious debate. The serious debate was what's going to be better for Judaism, and it turned out that it's a famous story. The bet was, you call a bet, was between the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shnei Zalman of Yadi, and another great rabbi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditchev, that whoever will blow the shofar, which is the horn, on high holidays, that side is going to win. That's how it broke down. Because from a spiritual perspective, we know that we can control outcomes in heaven, and because we have free choice. So do however we want. Some people want to play it. I'm not me. But the great rabbis, great leaders who are spiritual leaders can't control certain outcomes. So the bet was whoever blew the shofar, which is the penetrating to the heavens and the high holidays. So the story was that the Rabbi Shneur Zalman got up in the morning, did his preparations, but instead of starting the prayer service, which takes 2-3 hours, and then you blow the shofar, he blew the shofar that year early. Whereas the second rabbi started his preparations, he started his preparation a little faster, but he blew shofar later. And eventually, Napoleon lost the war, and the Russian czars won the war. But what happened? The upshot was that Judaism in Eastern Russia still maintained his Judaism for another 100 years. Whereas in Germany and France, you started with the Reform and Enlightenment movement, and Judaism fell apart.
What we have to do right now is take our break at the middle of the program, but don't go anywhere because we'll be back in 1 minute to continue our conversation on the Merchant of Venice, so stay tuned.
KNXT thanks all its loyal viewers and respected businesses who have supported your Catholic television station. Now you can support KNXT with program underwriting by having your name, your company's name, or organization associated with your favorite program. Detailed information about you or your company will appear before and after each program or day part you select. Keep the quality and spiritual message alive and make a difference. Call 559-488-7440 today or go online at knxt.tv to find out more about program underwriting on KNXT.
Welcome back to our conversation with the director of the Merchant of Venice, the lead actor Shylock in Jaguar, Bennett, and also Rabbi Zirkind, having us a discussion around the Merchant of Venice and its eternal challenge in terms of tolerance, in terms of understanding, and in terms of even authenticity regarding religious stereotyping. Now, why don't you help us out, Jaguar? You are quite the actor. And there are two kinds. You are quite the great actor. And could you do the part that we all want to remember is about when he explains to his friend Celerino why he doesn't want to accept anything but the flesh, because he does want to have his day, because after all, he is going to explain he's a human being.
Yeah, and actually, I'd like to preface this a little bit by saying, this is I think one of the great geniuses of Shakespeare, who was not, perhaps the most broad-minded man in the world, but he had amazing artistic talent. And one of Shakespeare's great qualities is that he really gets into his characters. He has a great deal of empathy, and even with characters that he does not approve of, he gives them very plausible and human motivations. And the scene is set up, it's become very clear that Antonio cannot pay his bond. He's been ruined by bad financial dealings. And the famous penalty of this bond is the pound of flesh. And Antonio's friend Celerino asks him, why take this? It's not going to bring your money back. And Shylock's reply is, to bait fish withal. If it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. He hath disgraced me, and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heeded mine enemies, and what is his reason? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, affections, senses, passions? Fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same summer and winter as a Christian is. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be by Christian example? Why, revenge. The villainy you teach me I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction.
How did it feel for you, and how does it feel each week as you present that logic of Shylock?
Well, I mean, he's partly, I think, making a very human appeal, but he's also using it to justify very immoral actions. I think what he's saying about the common humanity of all of us is very well said and very well thought, but look where he leads it to. It's not that we can all be good together, that we can all live together. He's bringing it to, and I can be as bad as you, and I'm just as justified, and we can fight for eternity. It's, it comes from a human place. It's just not a very good human place.
Rabbi, any initial brief remark about that one passage? Does it give you one thing to say about that text?
First of all, we don't believe in revenge. Okay? That is a no-no. The other thing that comes to my mind is you look at, in the context of a contract, the contract, from a Jewish perspective, has no validity. And the reason why is every human being has a mission. We have a spark of God within us, and God gives us a mission on this world. Our body is not our possession. I can give you my possessions away, I can take your possessions away, but I can ruin my possessions. It's a bad thing to ruin your possessions because you're wasting God's things. You're not allowed to. But the bottom line here is to take somebody's pound of flesh, or even to sign, is wrong and it's illegal. Us, the Jewish people, have a mission. I wouldn't say only Jewish people. Everybody, human beings, have a mission to preserve our body, not to deface it. And this is a gift from God. It's like I entrust in you something for safekeeping. You have no right to do anything but to watch it. God entrusts our body to us for safekeeping to do God's mission. And therefore, we're not allowed to deface it. And that is a fundamental thing that even has what you call practical applications even today.
I'm sorry. It's interesting that one of the reasons why we modernized this thing was exactly for this reason, is that I, as a director, wanted to show an outsider, and in this case, he happens to be labeled a Jew. And we actually discussed a lot about whether or not how orthodox, how observant Shylock's background might have been. And we pretty much came to the conclusion that it wasn't at all. I mean, he's a Jew in
name only.
Name only. And he's still kept out on the outside because of that. He's still kept as something other because of that. And so his motivations that may be understandable here are not necessarily, they're not born out of a Jewish understanding. And that's one of the tacks that we've taken. One of the questions I used to ask my cast a lot is, who is your Shylock? Everybody, everywhere, has somebody that they keep on the outside for whatever reason. And in our production, we tried very hard to make it, you could take Shylock and I could have put a black man in there. I could have put a Hispanic man in there. I could have put a Muslim in there. As a matter of fact, interestingly, my Bassanio was played by a Muslim. So, we tried to really play with that ambiguity to make everybody question, who is it that you're keeping on the outside and why? Is it just because of something on the surface? Is it because you're not thinking about them and what they can do in both a positive light and a negative light to you? Because Shylock is the victim of a lot of prejudice, and that rage that comes from that grows to such an extent that he's obsessed.
Jaguar, is there one final thought? We have about 2 minutes. There may be a chance to invite our viewers to one last insight into your character, and then we're going to tell them about King Lear, which is coming up right soon at the Woodward Park. One last thought about Shylock?
Well, this is a play, I think, really about dehumanization. Shylock is dehumanized. This, degrades his own moral character. He wants to dehumanize the people around him. And to me, this is really a play, as Heather said, about how do we push people on the outside? How do we turn people into things that we can treat as objects? And how this becomes a self-perpetuating cycle of hatred on both sides.
Now, we have another play coming up that the Woodward Shakespeare Festival is going to present. We could put the graphic up now, and maybe, Heather, you could just mention a little bit about why we're going to want to go to see King Lear and further see how the vision of Shakespeare takes another direction in another play.
Absolutely. King Lear is one of the biggest and most beautiful of his tragedies. It's about a man facing his mortality and the changes in his life that come just before that in his family. It's both a family drama and a political drama, which I find fascinating. And it's another play in which nobody gets off easy. Even the great King Lear makes his mistakes and has to pay the consequences for it. And so it's a challenging show, but I think one that everyone's going to find both entertaining and thought-provoking.
Well, we want to thank our panel today. We did have the director of The Merchant of Venice, Heather Parish. We had the main character, Jaguar Bennett, and we also had Rabbi Levi Zirkind share with us some deep insights into the humanity of that play and also its indication of where we can go to the dark side, all of us. And I hope that when we see plays like this and when we have discussions around interfaith issues, when we think about stereotyping, racial profiling, when we think about the easy solutions that we all choose so often, we will come to our senses, perhaps dramatically, and we will read good drama, see good drama, such as Woodward Shakespeare Festival, that will also read and see ideas that are clearer, richer, deeper, and brighter than what is often put on the media these days. God bless.